Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Hennebury, and I'm the Associate Director of the Museum Studies program here at the University of Michigan. Along with Director Kerstin Bart and Program Assistant Amy Smola, I want to thank you for joining us here in our MSP Zoom room for a Museums at Noon presentation. A quick note about our session today. Following the presentation, there will be some time for questions, and you're also welcome to add your comments or inquiries to the chat. In my role as the Associate Director, it is my great pleasure to work with and learn from students engaged in a wide range of museum endeavors and internships. Today's presentation will be offered by Taylor West, a member of our Museum Studies 2021 cohort and a PhD candidate in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, where she is studying vertebrate inner ear evolution, comparative morphology, and sensory biology. As you will hear in her presentation, Taylor is passionate about digitization within museum collections and museum spaces. This work was critical to her recently completed Museum Studies practicum at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. Though the internship itself is formally complete, Taylor has continued to work at Oxford and is exploring the many facets of digitization, considering ethics of display and access, the mechanics of 3D imaging and representations, and the future of digital collections and museums. This is all part of an ongoing independent research project. It is wonderful that we were able to pry Taylor away from this work long enough to have her share her experiences with us today. Please join me in welcoming Taylor West.
Thank you, Deirdre, for that introduction. Very kind. Let me make sure I can master the screen share. 3+ years-ish into COVID terms. Is it good? Look good?
It looks good.
Okay, excellent. Okay, yes, thank you, Deirdre, and thank you everybody for joining today. I'm really excited to share this work with all of you. As Deirdre said, this was work that I performed as part of my Museum Studies practicum. I began in April, but it hasn't stopped. We're still working on it, still progressing it, seeking funding to continue it. A lot of you understand how that goes. But I'm excited to share it. I have a lot to get through, so I'm gonna get started right away. Okay, here is just a very quick overview of the outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll start with an introduction where I will talk about the reason that I decided to do a digitization themed project, as well as how I ended up settling on Oxford for the location of my project. Then I'll get into the actual details of the project at OUMNH. I'll talk about the scanning process, where I'll define what scanning is, define what digitization is, for those of you who might not be familiar. I'll talk a little bit about what worked really well, and I'll also discuss some of the issues we had, because not everything works on the first try. And then I'll wrap it up kind of by going through a lot of the successes we've had to date with the project, as well as some future aims and what we hope to do in the near future. Okay, so first off, why digitization? This comes from a purely personal passion of mine. So while I've been at Michigan, all of my doctoral research, all of the data that I've used for that has been a form of digitization. So at the Research Museum Center at the University of Michigan Museum of Zoology, we have a CT scanner. And you can see that machine right here in the bottom left-hand corner. It's very nice, it's expensive, amazing machine. I wanted to work with one of these and use it to collect data since I was an undergrad, and I started reading about the concept and the methods. So the fact that I could come to Michigan and pursue that was amazing. I couldn't wait to get started. And I fell in love with digitization through that process. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll just go through it really quickly, what it is and how it works. You take a collection specimen or an object such as this snake in the jar up here on the top left. You'll place that snake into the scanner, and then the scanner will work with some software to create a 3D rendering of that snake that you can then explore on a computer. So when we put a small snake like this ringneck snake into the scanner, we can produce its skull, as you see here in the bottom right-hand corner. And that allows you to use specimens and look at them without destroying them. So it's a very useful non-destructive technique when you want to work with sometimes rare or valuable specimens. In the top right-hand corner, you'll see an example of what we call DICT, which is a method that actually allows you to examine the soft tissue that lies underneath the skeleton, or something that's softer than bone inside of a specimen. So this one specifically came from a monarch butterfly that I placed into the machine. Well, our CT tech Ramon did it. I didn't do it, but he placed it into the machine. And then from that, it produced the images and a stack and a three-dimensional model. And I was able to take from that images of the eye structures, of structures in the brain. So these methods are really useful. It's a really good way to explore specimens, and it is a form of digitization I fell in love with, but it's not the only kind of digitization that exists. So through my museum studies program practicum, I was hoping to expand my experience into a new realm of digitization. And so when I sought out opportunities at museums, this is what I was kind of asking them if they were interested in as well. So I ended up going to Oxford. And how did I end up choosing Oxford? I had a few museums I was interested in. There were a few I planned to reach out to. Oxford was the first one I contacted. I sent a cold email. I said, hey, I love digitization. I see you have some scans online. Maybe you own some scanners. Maybe you're interested. Email me back if you want to talk about this. And I wasn't sure I'd hear back, but excitingly, I did. I heard back pretty quickly. They were really receptive to the project that I proposed. So they were really interested in things that I said I wanted to do. They had similar interests. So things aligned really nicely in that way. On top of it, they also let me know that they had an active redisplay taking place. I'll get into this in more detail in a bit, but basically what that means is they were about to start a redisplay where they were replacing all of the displays in their main court. So they were adding new specimens in, kind of changing up the look of the museum. And so they thought that there might be a really good opportunity to add in a three-dimensional aspect to this redisplay. And I was kind of coming to them at a really opportune time. But the final point, and probably the most important point, the reason I ended up choosing Oxford is because they already owned all of the scanning equipment that I needed to make my digitization dreams come true. So scanning equipment is very expensive, and it helps if you go somewhere that already has the stuff to support your project ideas, and they did. They had equipment, they just hadn't put it to much use yet. So the stars aligned and I chose Oxford. Also, Oxford is a very historic, very beautiful, famous campus. And so I wasn't really going to complain about having to spend several months working there. Excuse me. Here you can see some photos of Oxford. It's gorgeous. I mean, I think it speaks for itself. These are some photos of the Bodleian libraries. Just a beautiful place to spend time. Okay, now for just a little bit of background on the Natural History Museum itself. So the Oxford University Museum of Natural History first opened in 1860. And interestingly, it was the university's very first science-centric building. So before this museum was built, there wasn't really a hub for science at the university. It was mostly humanities-based, which was pretty common for the time, but science was really starting to get a foothold, and universities were starting to care a bit more about the study of science. So Oxford knew they needed to kind of get on this. part of the reason that they were pushing to build a science building as well is because Cambridge University, which is just a short drive from Oxford, they were having a lot of scientific success at the time. So it was kind of like a rivalry in a sense, you know, Cambridge is doing well, Cambridge is producing science and scientists, like we need to not fall behind in this arms race. So they put plans together for this building. And because of that, the building has never been anything else. So this building wasn't used in any other way. It was built to be a museum. It was designed to be a natural history museum. And you can see that in the details of the building. So one result of that is that the building itself is a teaching tool. So for example, in this middle photo, if you look on the second story of the museum, there's these really thin pillars here. And those are actually made of rocks and minerals from all around the United Kingdom. So they went and they harvested them from different places and they built these pillars, and each pillar is actually labeled with the type of mineral it is and the location that it was harvested from. So as you walk around, of course, you're seeing skeletons, you're seeing dinosaurs, you're seeing displays, but you can look at a wall and you can see, learn something about a mineral that's in the United Kingdom. Additionally, all of the stone archways have a lot of carvings in them of flora and fauna from around the world, and they're placed sort of near associated flora and fauna. So a tree, like a plant and an animal species that might coincide in the same like geographic space, their carvings are kind of placed near each other in the museum. So here's an example of one of those really nice carvings. This is a snake, a lizard, and a little insect up there. So beautiful museum. I think a lot of it, the beauty kind of speaks for itself through these photos, but the photos even don't really do it justice, honestly. If you can visit, you should sometime. Collections wise, it houses many zoological collections, all your classics, entomology, herpetology, mammalogy, ichthyology, they're all in there. There's also some very famous specimens from pivotal early evolutionary biologists like Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace in this museum. In total, the museum hosts about 6 to 7 million specimens. A whopping 5 million of those are insects. There's many an entomologist at this museum. And yeah, they've got a big collection. They're very proud of it. It's very nice. One other specimen that the museum is pretty famous for that you actually might already be familiar with is the dodo. And this dodo is why you see the dodo in their logo. My talk is titled after the dodo. There's dodo paraphernalia in the gift shop. It's like a very big symbol for Oxford. And the reason for that is because the Oxford University Museum of Natural History actually has the only remaining soft tissue of a dodo on the planet. So the dodo is extinct. It's been extinct for a long time, but Oxford does have surviving remains of soft tissue from this bird. And it's one of their claims to fame. So the soft tissue is actually not on display. It's kept safely behind the scenes, but here's a picture of those soft tissue remains so that you can see. Here we've got a couple limb bones, a skull, and some soft tissue surrounding the skull. All of this is there. They've got it kept safe in the back. But one cool thing, I mentioned that Oxford, when I talked to them, they had said that they already own scanning equipment. And I kind of thought that they might, because before I started there, I did see a model they had uploaded of this soft tissue. So they hadn't used the scanners for many things, but when they first acquired the digitization software and the scanners, they did scan a couple items. And one thing they scanned was the soft tissue. So I'll get into how these are made. That's what my talk is about. But these are actually 3D reconstructions of the soft tissue from this slide. So you're able to take that and make a 3D model of it that looks pretty darn close to the real thing. But this is really nice because these are online. You can go see them after this talk. They're publicly accessible. You can spin the skull around, you can click the numbers and it'll tell you more about the structure, and you can learn about the specimen that way, even though it's kept very safe behind the scenes at the museum. Okay, So my project at OUMNH. So before I get into kind of how I wanted to bring this project to fruition, it's important that I talk about the permanent redisplay, because my project was really, the goal was to align it with this redisplay that was ongoing. So it started in early May of 2022. I arrived in Oxford in April. So right before they started putting things into cases, I was there. So it was a really good, it was good timing. But what it is they redesigned and put in 20 new permanent displays. And we call them permanent displays because they'll be on display potentially 10, 15, 20 years from now. So a ton of thought, ton of effort went into deciding what goes into these cases, deciding what kind of message you want to send, what you're hoping the public will take away from it. It's a huge project. Anytime a museum does a redisplay like this, it was really phenomenal to be there while they were doing it and to experience firsthand how much work goes into a redisplay. But this here is a photo of the finished redisplay, or where it's at right now. So this picture was taken from the entrance of the museum. If you walk in the main doors, go up a few steps, this is your view. And you see on the left, 5 new cases, on the right, 5 new cases. And then on the opposite side of each case, there's another one. So you have 5 on the left and 5 on the right that you can't see in this photo. But this is what it looks like. This is the museum at night. Very beautiful. So yeah, so this was what they were starting just as I arrived in Oxford. The cases are meant to explore important concepts about biodiversity, the natural world, evolution, in a way that anybody who visits can take something away from it and learn something new. I've picked a couple displays to highlight here just to give you an idea, because these are the specimens that we scanned. So it gives you an idea kind of what we were looking at working with for my project. This is the Life as We Know It case. The main point of this case is to display the variety of life on planet Earth. And interestingly, the circle size that you see actually represents the relative species diversity within each taxonomic group. So for example, this very big circle in the background is arthropoda. So those are your arthropods, your insects, crustaceans like crabs, all fall into this category. And it's the category on Earth that has the most species described to science. So it's the most speciose. If you look over here in the bottom left, you'll see plants. It's the second largest circle, obviously a lot smaller than arthropods, but bigger than most of the others. And just to give you an idea of where humans fall, this is the vertebrate circle. So we're here. That's like vertebrate species diversity compared to everything else on the planet. It's represented with a bird, a lizard, a frog. I think this might be a bat. So yeah, this is a really cool display. I think it brings a lot of important concepts together. Great and Small is a personal favorite of mine. It's just arthropods, and it's arthropods of varying size. So at the very center of the circle, you have really tiny like beetles and insects, and then they get larger every time you go out until you get to the outside, where you have these massive crabs, massive arachnids, and then the final massive giant Japanese spider crab in the center, which is a huge hit with visitors. It's enormous, very fragile. Watching them put it into the case was nerve-wracking, but they did a phenomenal job, and it looks great. Ages of Extinction is a case about the large extinction events that have occurred throughout evolutionary time. So the main point of this case is to show sort of which organisms were thriving and abundant before and after each extinction event. So it's kind of a way to look at how Earth changed after there was a massive disruption due to an extinction event. The Tree of Life is a phylogeny, so that's where you see all the lines that are connecting things and trying to show how they're related. Those are phylogenies. So here we've got a really big one that includes all living things on planet Earth. And it talks about and explains relatedness using 6 examples. So using humans, bananas, fungus, a squid, an E. coli, I think, and barnacles. So it uses lines to show the last time everything shared an ancestor. And it's a really cool breakdown of a pretty complex topic. And lastly, Future in Our Hands. This is a really exciting exhibit because it includes the very popular Dodo reconstruction, which you see right here. This is not the soft tissue that I showed you earlier. It's a fully reconstruction, but it's very popular. People will come to the museum just to see this Dodo. If they can't find it, they'll ask where it is. So it was really important to get it into one of these displays, and it shares the case with specimens from endangered, extinct, and very common species. So the main takeaway or point of this exhibit is to show that human behavior, our choices, and how we interact with the planet does affect how the livelihoods and the length of time like other species will spend on the earth, and how like what their quality of life will be like. So this is a really cool case that I like a lot too. So that's the entire redisplay in a nutshell. And so that started right after I arrived. And so I proposed a workflow to work in some sort of digitization aspect. And the plan was that objects, they enter the conservation lab at the museum for both assessment and display prep before they go out. They have to be assessed and they have to be prepared, repaired if there's damage or anything. So they come into the conservation lab. I decided to set up my digitizing headquarters in the conservation lab so that I could intercept these objects after they were prepared, but before they were released to be displayed and put on their mounts. So I would intercept something, scan it, and then put it back into the queue so it could go on display. And we had wonderful conservation staff working with us. They made sure I handled everything properly, and so that nothing was damaged as it made its way back onto the display. But why should we care? You know, why is this interesting? Why digitization? Why even try to put this into such a big project already? To answer those questions, I kind of outlined 3 main project goals. So my first goal was to find a place for digitization in a modern museum space. I did not invent the idea of digitizing things in museums. It's very common now, actually. It's really picking up speed. You can go into a lot of museums, not just natural history museums, and you can see specimens that are digitized. You can see interactive displays, but Oxford hadn't capitalized on this yet. So it's new to this museum specifically. They had the equipment, and it was kind of a chance to take the project from nothing to something, basically. So I was really excited about that. My second goal was to create interactive tools that could enhance exhibits, as well as enhance the traditional museum experience. So the way I see digitization is it's something that can improve upon the already very good museum experience. If you can actually learn more about a specimen from an interactive display or from a QR code that pulls up a scan, then you should do it. And so that was the goal here, to see if we could create some interactive tools. And lastly, I wanted to generate resources for both research and public engagement purposes. So every time we scan something, it can go into a repository or a database where it can be accessed again in the future by researchers, by people on the outreach team, by public engagement officers. Anytime you make that scan, it can be used over and over and over again in so many different ways. And so I saw this as an opportunity to start some sort of database for scans at Oxford. Okay. So we've laid the groundwork. Now I'm actually going to talk about what scanning is. So this is my favorite part of the talk. Actually get to see some cool scans. So first off, what is scanning when I say scanning in the context of this talk? So whenever I say I scan something, it's a specific type of 3-dimensional digitization. And so then that leads to the question, well, what is digitization? And digitization, it can take many forms, but there's 2D digitization, which looks like photography or transcription of text. There's also 3-dimensional digitization, which I've talked about a bit. The micro CT stuff that I talked about at the beginning is a form of 3D digitization, and photogrammetry is another example. So from the Medina paper down here, you can see this is photogrammetry. This is when you make a 3D model using photographs and software that can combine the photographs. Here we've got another example of micro CT. And then structured light scanning is 3D as well. And that is the type of scanning that I used exclusively at Oxford. So the main difference between these is if you take a 2D photo of something, for example, an insect drawer like this, you have a digital copy of it, and it's very useful. This one, you can't turn it around. You can't look at the ventral side of the insects. It's just what you see here in 2 dimensions. That's your digital product. With micro CT and structured light scanning and photogrammetry, you can interact with the specimen and see it from a 360-degree angle. So this Paramyscus, the small mammal skeleton, you can spin it around and look at the other side of the skull. Or this bird, you can spin it around and see the other side. So the end result is a model that looks very, very similar as you can get it to the original specimen. That's our goal with scanning, what we're trying to produce. So at Oxford, all scanning was structured light 3D surface scanning. And it was done, unsurprisingly, with a structured light scanner. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's the process we used. We like to call the structured light scanner the world's most expensive iron because it looks like a clothing iron, but it's not, and it costs way more than a clothing iron does. But that's kind of what it looks like, and it's not, you'll see, but the process like isn't far off from like the motion of ironing. Anyway, what we use this machine to do is to measure the three-dimensional shape of an object. So if you look at this photo on the right, you can see it has these circles. It has cameras, it has lights, and it's going to project and use reflection and light patterns to actually capture the shape of the object you're pointing it at. And if you can do that, capture the shape, which is also the geometry, same thing, and capture the texture, which is the outside external appearance of the specimen, then you can make a model. So those are the 2 main goals and the 2 things you're trying to capture with the scanner when you do this. So that's what our goal was. Here is a nice photo I found on the internet that I think outlines the process perfectly. You take your iron, your scanner, and you point it at your object, and then in real time, it's going to produce a digital model on your computer. You can watch it happen. It's really cool. Yeah, it's very fun. An important note is that this type of scanning does not capture internal data. So if we scan a turtle and we look at the model, you'll be able to see the turtle shell, you'll be able to see the limbs, the face, you'll be able to flip it over and see the plastron, the shell underneath, but you can't zoom into it and see the brain, you can't see the lungs or the ribs. Anything that's not visible just from the surface does not scan with this type of scanner. So you can do that with the CT methods I described with my doctoral research. That is a method that will allow you to capture internal information, but this one does not. So these are, they're hollow scans. There's nothing in the inside you can look at. Because they can do this, the CT methods are more expensive and also more time consuming, but obviously they're useful for different purposes. So every type of scanning, I think, has a place. There's a place where it's the best type to use. And so it's definitely, they're all useful in some way. What you do after to start the process is you'll attach your scanner to a very powerful computer because you need something that can run the software and actually create these models. We use them in Alienware, one that you can see here. And then the scanner captures geometry, it captures texture, it processes them separately, and then the software will combine them and make your model for you. So, but it needs a little guidance, as you'll see as we go on. It's not all powerful, but it's pretty close. Here's a scanner. You can see it pointed at a specimen that we've placed very carefully in sand for scanning. Here is an ammonite. This is the real specimen and its 3D model that we were able to create on the screen. And in this photo, we see Clement holding the scanner. He's scanning a extinct thylacine skull in this photo. This is Clement. I need to introduce him because he is on a lot of the slides that are coming up. Clement is an employee at the Museum of Natural History. He did his undergrad degree in 3D modeling. And so when he learned about my project, he was really interested in getting involved. He wanted to learn some of the editing software that I use, Blender. And so he asked if he could come around, if I could show him. I said, yes, of course. And then before I knew it, Clement was there on his breaks. He was there helping on his days off, on his weekends, extremely hardworking, and a huge thank you to Clement for all of his efforts, because I genuinely think we got way more done than I could have done on my own. And he kept me going on days when I was frustrated with software and such. So thank you, Clement, and you'll see him further in the talk as well. Okay, so Oxford owns not one scanner, but 2 scanners. So we saw the spider here. This is the blue one. And this here is the EVA. So the main difference between these is the spider is better at capturing smaller objects. So anytime we needed to scan a small crab or a small insect, we would use the spider. And anytime we had something massive to scan, like this model of a coelacanth, we used the EVA. So this coelacanth, I think, is about 4.5 feet long. It's actually the largest thing we've scanned to date, but we did scan it successfully. And it was very fun. And you can see me scanning it here with Jackie, one of my advisors. So most things we knew right away which scanner to use. Sometimes we had to try one and then switch to the other if it was too big or small. But they did have both, and we put both to use. Okay, so I've verbally explained what scanning looks like, but now I'll show you some videos, because it's going to make, it's going to make more sense if you get to actually see it happen. So in this first video, I'm scanning a megalodon tooth. And what you'll see is, you see the specimen there, it's placed on a platform that will rotate. So I will hold the scanner over it, I will rotate the platform, try to capture all of the information, then I will flip it over and I will do the exact same for the other side. This is a time lapse, so it took longer than this video, but that's what it looks like. So you point it, you can see me looking at the computer, I'm watching to make sure the model seems like it's forming correctly. So that's how that goes. And then this is Clement doing the exact same thing with a snake specimen. And in this video, you can actually see the computer. So you can see the model rendering in real time in the background as he goes. You can see the lights flashing. So it's picking up that information, what that shape of that snake looks like. The camera is also capturing the texture, which will be applied later, but he goes really slow to make sure he captures all the information, and he turns it as well. So that's what that looks like. I'll also point out, we often use the glass on the bottom because it allowed you to get more information we found than with a solid surface, but not always. Okay, so overall, what worked really well? We had a ton of success with skulls. They just worked pretty well, and limb bones as well. So the femurs of your leg or the humerus in your arm, those long limb bones worked pretty well, probably because they're pretty uniform in shape. We also had a lot of success with larger insects and arachnids. So this photo down here has some insects and arachnids in it. And they're all about the size of your palm or maybe your hand. The scanner really liked those. It worked pretty well. We were able to scan one side, flip it over, scan the other, and get a good model. Surprisingly, wet specimens worked really well. So I was surprised by this. A wet specimen is something that's preserved in fluid, usually ethanol. So this tortoise, for example, is in ethanol, and it's imperative that they stay wet. So we couldn't take them out for very long, but we were able to get very good scans of them, taking them out, scanning them, putting them back. I thought that the reflectance from the ethanol might mess with the scanner, but it didn't. They worked fairly well most of the time. And then crustaceans also worked really well. So these little guys like this is one before and after some conservation painting that I did. They work really well across the board, and we scanned quite a few crabs. I've got some videos of things that worked very nicely. So here is an ammonite. So you see the scan, you can click and drag and spin it around, explore the model in 3 dimensions. That's the actual specimen we scanned. So you can see they look pretty darn similar. It's pretty fun. It's really fun too to scan something and kind of not know if it's going to work out really well or not, and then be pleasantly surprised when it does. Like this butterfly stingray, he's an odd shape and I wasn't sure it would work, but there he is. He looks quite nice. You can give him a little spin. It even picked up a little bit of damage on his fin, which they fixed before he went on display. But yeah, it looks cool. And here in the last one, we've got what they call a shamed face crab, because he's like hiding in embarrassment. Oh, yeah. So he's cute. He looks just as cute in 3D on the model, I think. But he's very nice. Yeah, so it was great to work with all of these and kind of just see what came from every object you got to scan. I've got two more really good examples here. This is a bonobo skull, so a primate. This one worked very well, and it was a very quick scan, like maybe 10 minutes it took to produce this, which is kind of surprising because you've got the teeth, you've got the sutures and the indentations on the skull, and you might think that a scanner would struggle with some of these details, but most of the time it worked fairly well. And then if there was something wrong and we wanted to go in and fix it afterwards, we could. Clement did a lot of that. Here is a really big blue morpho butterfly that's bigger than my hand, very big specimen. And if you see the three-dimensional scan, it even manages to capture some of the iridescence on the wing. And I think that's just really impressive that we can make models that look so similar to the real specimens. But like every good thing, you're going to have struggles. And we did have struggles as well. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were some things that the scanner didn't like. For example, very shiny and reflective surfaces like insect carapaces, so like shiny beetles. It didn't like their backs with the shiny wing cases. Small and repeated structures were a big struggle. For example, this snake specimen here, it didn't like all of these ribs. It was hard to scan them all. It just wouldn't pick them up, even though it's such a nice specimen. And then long and thin structures also gave us thin structures gave us problems. So like tentacles or antennae on beetles, stuff like that was a struggle. I think that we can get it eventually. We just need to either improve scanning practices or get better scanning equipment as new stuff comes out, or a combination of both. I think it'll happen in the future. We also had some funny scanning bloopers that we were sometimes able to fix. So for example, this one we fixed eventually, but this is a very nice arachnid. It's preserved, it's ready for display. We were very excited to give it immortality with a scan. But the scanner had other ideas, and it ended up making it like more terrifying than you could probably imagine it ever being. I think it has like 20 legs. The scanner just didn't want to combine the legs correctly, and we ended up with this on the right, which I think eventually we fixed. But another one, this one's kind of sad. We love this hedgehog. She's so adorable. Clement was smitten, obviously. It was love at first sight. We wanted to make her into a beautiful scan to share with everyone, but the scanner had other ideas and only really liked her face and her little hands. But it hated her hair, it hated her spines. It just didn't work well. And she still sits like this, half finished, because we can't get her to scan properly yet. So not everything worked, but a lot of things did, and we're grateful for what did work. We also had some really unique scanning requests. So one came from the Library and Archives Department. They actually have a lot of belongings of Professor Westwood, who was the very first professor of zoology at Oxford University. They have a lot of his things, and they were like, hey, can you try and scan some of these? Because it'd be cool to have models. So we tried. Some worked well, some didn't. I think they gave us the magnifying glass, a letter opener, his shoes, which are on the next slide, and his spectacles. And the magnifying glass didn't work well, but it took funny photos of Clement. The opener, I think, worked fairly well. And I'll show you the shoes on the next slide because it's a video. But another cool scanning request came from the herpetology department. They have this snake that's consuming a lizard, and we were able to get a scan of that action happening. So, and there's a lot of cool stuff like this preserved in zoological collections. So I think it's a great chance to scan some really unique stuff. And here are Westwood shoes. So literally there's one in this box and there's one here, and we just put it out and we scanned it. We thought it would flop. We thought it'd be funny though, you know, it would produce something funny, but it looks so good. The shoe looks amazing. It cracks me up every time because we were shocked, but it does. It just looks great. It looks just like the real shoe. So now they have that, you know, eternal digital copy of Professor Westwood's shoe. Okay, so just to wrap it up, I'm going to talk about some of the successes we've had so far and also some of the future aims we have for the project. And this is just, yeah, a little bit of Instagram attention that we got. It was fun. Okay, so firstly, we've been adding things to Sketchfab. So this is what I was talking about. It's the site that can be sort of like a repository for scans, and you can choose to make things accessible to the public. So you can change the settings and let people see your specimens when they're scanned. Our idea was to make a collection on Sketchfab for each display case. So when people went and they saw the Life as We Know It display like this, they could go to it and then go to the Sketchfab page, and they could say like, oh, I love this. Here's this blue morpho butterfly again. And then you can go to the page and you can actually see the butterfly. You can see the back of it, which you can't here. You can read more about it because we've put in little biographies. We've annotated it with fun facts about the species or its life history, so that you learn more about everything that's on display. And so our goal is to do that with every case, to make like a little page where you can go and learn more about each. And we've started that with Life as We Know It, as well as Future in Our Hands. We've got that up and going, and we plan to add more. We plan to do one hopefully for every case in the redisplay. A side project that I did that had a lot of success was the Red Lady of Paviland. So this is something that's on display at Oxford University Museum of Natural History. It has its own display case in the court. And these are human remains. It's the oldest example of ceremonial burial in Western Europe. And it's called the Red Lady, even though later we found out this is actually, these are the remains of a man. They thought it was a lady at the time, but it's a young man. And it's called the Red Lady because the bones are stained by red ochre. So they have this like really, really nice red tint to them, and they're very beautiful. But we have them all, and I was able to scan each one of them. So these are photos of that happening. And then what I did is I took every bone that was individually scanned and I combined them into one big interactive model. So over here, this is Blender. This is an editing software that I use. I took each scan and I laid it out anatomically to match how it would look, but this is also how it looks in the display case. So this is an exact copy of how this is displayed in the court. So if you go look at it and look at this, you'll see they're in the same array. So to kind of orientate you, we've got a piece of a pelvic bone here, followed by the limb bones. So this is the femur, and then your fibula and your fibula, tibia down here, lower leg bones, and then a bunch of toe bones, foot and toe bones here. And then this would be the same on the right side. And then you also have the right humerus from the arm and the radius and ulna from the lower arm. So these are a model. They exist on Sketchfab as individual scans. So you can look at one, explore it, but I also uploaded the interactive version of all of them together. So now you can spin them around, you can zoom in, you can take a closer look. And this is something obviously you can't do with the exhibit that's in the case in the museum. So it's just, it's cool. I think it's interesting. You can learn more about the anatomy, kind of get up close and personal with specimens that, in a way that allows them to still stay safely in their case. Okay, one other quick success of a side project was the Stonesfield Mammal Project. So this was actually a request from a postdoctoral researcher at the museum. She's thinking about writing something, publishing something on these fossils in the near future, and she wanted some models for the publication. These are pretty exciting and interesting because if I remember correctly, when William Buckland found these, they're from the Jurassic period. And when he found them, he thought they belonged to reptiles. So he thought they were the jaws of smaller reptiles living alongside of bigger dinosaurs. But they're actually mammals. And I think it was the first time we ever discovered that mammals were living alongside of dinosaurs back in the Jurassic period. I believe that is correct. But these are really cool, so they're valuable and important for her research. So now she has online models of those she can use in her publication or in outreach opportunities if she has any. A few other future aims are we're hoping to make an online interactive tour, which would allow people to virtually walk into the museum and turn toward a case, click on it, and then maybe interact with some of the models for the specimens that are in that case. That's up and coming. We're still working on it, but we think it would be a really successful project. We're also hoping potentially to put museum screens in the museum next to the display in which we would show something like this, which is like an animated version of a specimen from the extinctions case. So people could click on it, watch the animation, maybe learn more about it that they haven't already learned from the main display case. The museum is actively seeking funding to continue this project. This is from their website. And if you look under the innovation tab here, you'll see they've outlined like what's been done already. And they're actively trying to keep this going. Okay, in conclusion, I talked about the 3 goals that I had when I started my project, which were to find a place for digitization in a museum space, create interactive tools to enhance the museum experience, and generate resources for research and public engagement purposes. I feel like these were met with the project. I was very happy with what we were able to accomplish. We scanned nearly 200 specimens in a short amount of time, really. So I was very proud of where the project went, how far it's come. But doing this and starting it shows you how much opportunity and potential there still is. So I'm excited for the future. I'm hoping we can scan more objects and continue to see some of these ideas through to fruition. But I'm really proud of everything we've done so far. And these are just some of my favorite things that I was able to scan during my time. And with that, that's it. I will stop talking. Thank you. Thank you to all my advisors from every museum and everyone else for your help.
Thank you, Taylor. Wow, that's just so much work. And I agree that your sense of sort of satisfaction with these outcomes, it must feel just wonderful. You know, just so much work was completed. We do have a few minutes for questions. If there are any questions, I welcome raised hands or in the chat. And maybe to get us started, Taylor, I have just a very quick question. You mentioned right at the end when you shared their website with the innovation section about this phase 2 of their work that they're hoping to be doing using the light scanning to do the 3D modeling. How much of phase 2 was sort of pushed forward by you appearing on the scene for them? You know, was that always part of their goal, or were you sort of instrumental in opening up this as more of an option for them so quickly?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, I believe phase 2 is the main part where they were putting things on display, and now they're in phase 3. But when I first contacted Oxford, it was Dr. Hilary Ketchum was the first person I spoke with. She had personal interest in digitization of some things. She thought that it was a really good avenue, and something like we see it coming up in museums, you know, it's becoming more popular and they have the tools. So she had thought before this would be really good to do. With what I'm sure you know, and probably a lot of people who work in museums, is your museum personnel are so busy So busy. And that's something I learned through my practicum as well, is you're just constantly working, especially when you've got a redisplay going on. So I think they may have had dreams of like a digitization project, but they didn't have the time or the manpower, to make it happen. And so when I was given by you guys funding to pursue this exact sort of idea, I think it was kind of kismet in that it worked out that I ended up there. But so any ideas that they had of sort of like, oh, we would do this if we had time or resources, it happened because I was there and able to like kind of get the ball rolling on it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. So they had a vision, but you helped to make it a reality.
I think so. Yeah. I don't think I can take full credit. I think that
Well, no. But
well, yeah,
your expertise must have just felt like a miracle for them.
it was nice too. I've talked about Clement in the thing too, but he learned how to do it as well. So there's more than just one person now there who has like the capability, and it was really useful for me to be able to teach someone, like learn something and then teach it. It's always good. And
Right.
yeah.
Oh, wonderful. We have one question in the chat having to do with 3D printing. Is this something, so we scan things, has there thought of printing these at some point?
Why can't I see the chat? Maybe I'm wrong.
It's just, have you considered 3D printing or
Oh.
scans?
Oops, muted myself. They do have a 3D printer there. We talked about it. They I think also haven't used it for much. So they've got like these really cool pieces of equipment that they could really use for things. I think that's a really good idea. I think 3D printing would be great for like hands-on outreach, because obviously a scan on a screen is really cool. But what's greater to somebody than like getting to hold something and actually like look at it? And I think it's a really good idea, and I'd love to incorporate something like that. I think you do lose a little bit of resolution with a 3D print. So not always, but I'm sure you can pay a lot more money to get like a very accurate 3D print. But I think they'd be a little less exact than you see on these specimens that are digital models. But that doesn't mean they're not useful, and it doesn't mean it isn't something we should try. But I think that would be great to have like display tables of 3D printed objects. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that would be wonderful, especially in terms of accessibility to some of this content, to have a tactile component, as you said.
Yes.
Another question, do you get paid for scanning, or is this volunteer work? So maybe you can outline the internship with the Museum Studies program and how this is.
Yes. Yeah. So I could have gone into a bit of detail about that at first, I suppose, but I was funded to do this work by the Museum Studies program. So I wrote a small, broad proposal about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it. And then these wonderful people funded me to go do that work. So I was paid by MSP to do it, if that makes sense. But otherwise, it was the efforts from Clement and anyone else that came in to help, that was volunteer. The hope, though, is with funding that they'll be able to hire people to actually work on the project full time. So that would be great. But yeah, I was funded, and then everyone else was volunteering for now.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Are there any other questions for Taylor? I think one of the things that's so exciting in the material you've shared, Taylor, looking even back to the work you're doing at the University of Michigan and the opportunities of the more CAT scan, sort of internal soft tissue scanning, and then of course this surface 3D scanning that you've been doing at Oxford, is how it is both an educational exhibition tool, but also, as you noted in some of the special projects, tools for research that would be ongoing and made available for people who are maybe at some distance from the original artifact or specimen that perhaps maybe is too delicate too as well to be handled or brought out of storage.
Yeah.
It just seems that the opportunities are limitless really for how these 3D visualizations can be used and implemented in museums.
I agree. I think so. But it's got a special place in my heart, definitely. But I do think it's a big innovative way forward. I do think that it'll become more and more common, more and more mainstream, and it does close a lot of those barriers that you were talking about. So I think it's a really good foundational first step toward producing something that, and once you have that, you never know like what comes next. Once you have the resources produced, someone will think of a really cool way to use this, to make things even more accessible or more interesting, or expand like the boundaries that we know exist today, which is
Right.
fun. Yeah, it's really good.
Right.
It was
Who
a
knows?
great project.
The sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you so much, Taylor. I commend you for the clarity and thoroughness of your presentation. I feel like I learned so much about both the process, but also the potential of the product that you did at your Oxford internship. And it was just fantastic to have you share this with our community here at Michigan. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad to hear it, that it made sense.
It did.
You're never sure.
Thank you, Taylor. It was wonderful to hear about your work and to learn about your work. And I think it's very inspirational, as you see in the chat.
Yeah, these are so nice. This is great. It was nice to finally share it too with everybody. Because I've been at it.
It's a very unique, University of Michigan pace for this kind of work that is going on at the Oxford Museum of Natural History. So it's a fabulous collaboration.
It was, yes, definitely. And I think something I didn't have time really to talk about, because I was already rushing, is I feel like Michigan, at least my experience at the Research Museum Center, is it's a much more modern museum space. So it's kind of was like made to be innovative. It's very research centric. And then you have Oxford, which is a more like historical, traditional museum space, where they of course have the resources to do stuff like this, but it's not always like the first priority, I suppose. So it was cool to go somewhere like that and be like, hey, we can do this. You are all interested in it and you have the resources. And it was really nice to see it play out in kind of a more traditional museum setting.
Yeah, fabulous.
It's good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Taylor, and thank you all for joining us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Hey, it's Clement. I don't know if he's actually here. This is the Clement I was talking about, but
Hi, Clement.
I don't know if he's actually on it or if he just didn't log out.
Well, Taylor, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And, oh, look.
I know. I'm going to have to give him a hard time about it.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to talking to you very soon, but this was a fantastic brown bag presentation. So thank you for all your efforts.
Yeah, thank you for advising me.
Wow, my great pleasure.
Leading me.
Enjoy your weekend. Oh, yeah, Clement
There he
says
is.
hi. Clement, you're a small star or a big star here. And yes, have a great weekend.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys too. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Wyatt, for your nice comments. And yes, hello, Clement.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.